some of our listeners have suggested too. Important to hear the voices on the other side of the debate as well. So you sat down this week with somebody who can help us get the Polish government's point of view on this. Tell us who you spoke to.
He's an MEP called Patryk Jaki, who is probably one of the most vociferous voices in the European Parliament defending the legal changes that have happened in Poland over the last 5 or 6 years. His involvement in national politics dates back to 2015 when the current right-wing government took power, and his immediate boss was Zbigniew Ziobro, the justice minister, the man responsible for the scope and range of the judicial reform. So he's sort of been there at the inception of what they planned to do with the court system.
Okay, before we get into the meat of that debate, let's just hear from him first on how he got into politics, how he became a politician. It's quite an interesting story.
It's also because of sport, because of football. Because when I was young, I dreamt to become a professional football player. In the area where I lived, there was only a football field made of concrete and gravel. And every time when I tripped over, I get scars. So I started to ask friends who can change this. And I always get answered that politicians. So I decided to apply for the membership in a city council. And I won. I was 20. I probably still the youngest member of this council. And when I become a member of this council, my first move was to build this modern field with the illumination. And now children in this area can play football instead of drinking beer. And then when I grew up, I discovered other political motivation to become a professional politician. So that's how I started.
So that's how he became a politician, and as you were saying, he's now become a very prominent protagonist, if you like, in this debate over the rule of law in Poland, and in particular the changes that the Polish government has made to the judicial system. The accusation from the European Commission and from others is that the Polish government has violated the Polish constitution and EU law in the way it's gone about these changes, that it's basically bringing the judiciary under political control. Maybe just summarise before we hear from Patryk Jaki again, the key complaints. What are the key bodies that the Polish government has changed, and what's the criticism of the way they've gone about that?
The first change dates back to immediately after the Law and Justice took power in 2015. There was a dispute over judges appointed to the Constitutional Tribunal, which is essentially the country's top court. The new parliament ignored the 3 nominations that were made by the previous parliament and, according to constitutional scholars, illegally elected 3 new nominees who were sworn in by President Andrzej Duda. And so there's a general view among non-partisan observers that this step violated the Polish constitution. In subsequent years, the government has done a lot to completely rebuild the court system, especially there's a body that nominates judges, and it's supposed to be separate from the political process. The judges essentially nominate other judges away from political interference. And the nominating procedures to this body have been changed, and it's now firmly under the control of Parliament, which means it's under the control of the ruling party.
Okay, well, let's hear the government point of view, if you like, from Patryk Jaki as to why it was actually a good thing, if you like, in their point of view, to not have the judges nominating their own. In other words, to change that system, which Patryk Jaki explained to you during your interview.
There is accusation that this council is now politicized. This council has 25 members, and 15 of these members are judges, so majority. So this is the most important part of this council. And in the previous system, this council was 15 judges, was appointed by the judges. So it was against division of power, check and balance between 3 powers, executive, legislative, and the judge's powers. Because in that system, the judges appointed themselves, assessed themselves. So a new government changed the way how they appointed judges, and they choose Western system. Western system, Spanish system, because Spain has the same judicial council. However, this judicial council is appointed by the parliament in Poland, choose the same system.
Another line of defense, if you like, used by the Polish government is that they are being unfairly singled out here by the European Commission and by others, and they point to judicial systems in other countries, such as Germany and Spain.
In Germany, there is the same judicial council. Half of this judicial council are the politicians themselves, lands ministries of justice, and the second half, people appointed by the politician.
The thing is, the German one is done in accordance with German constitutional principles.
I am pretty sure that this system is still in line with the Polish constitution, but the most important thing is that look into the German system. Our accusation to the Poland is that we politicized the system. So in Poland, the judges still appointed judges, but in Germany, politicians appointed judges. So when someone tried to tell us that the Polish system is more politicized than in German, for us is a joke.
Of course, in one sense, ultimately, this is really about whether the Polish system is correct and constitutional and in line with EU law. But what is the response to that line of argument that they are being unfairly singled out and that other countries also have kind of versions of this system?
I mean, in a sense, they're correct. There's a wide range of ways that countries select judges, and other countries, Germany and Spain and France, do have a more political approach to nominating judges. The complaint against the Poles is that the government rammed through these changes, changing an existing system and putting it much more firmly under political control than was the case in the past. Some critics of the government see that actually violates the Polish constitution and the separation of powers that the constitution sets up. The government obviously doesn't agree with that view at all.
And another thing that you touched on in the interview is how this is impacting Poland in quite a concrete way right now. I mean, you know, it's really affecting the bottom line, if you like, because as we know, Poland has not yet received the green light to get money from the EU's recovery fund, which is partly due to concerns about this, at least partly due to concerns about the independence of the judiciary. And we're also expecting a European Court ruling soon, which may or may not uphold a European Commission plan that would allow them to cut EU funding from the budget, again, over concerns like this. So, if you like, this is already costing Poland, the Polish government, money, and could end up costing them a lot more. Why do you think, and perhaps Patrick Jaki helps us explain this, Poland is kind of sticking to its guns here and hasn't reached some kind of compromise with Brussels here?
They have talked. There's a disciplinary chamber in the Supreme Court that's supposed to punish judges who do bad things. And so the government contends that there's rampant criminality among judges, lots of ex-communists in the system.
Right. That was another thing, that the reason they feel they had to act, or they say they had to act, is because the old system wasn't working. The old system was throwing up problems, and so they were carrying out a necessary reform. But at the same time, of course, now they know where they stand and they know that it's costing them money.
The Court of Justice of the EU has found that this disciplinary chamber is not actually a court in the legal sense and has demanded that it be suspended. And Poland has refused to do that and is now facing €1 million a day fine for every day that it doesn't suspend. This chamber is continuing to function. And the government has talked about potentially rolling back the chamber. They've also admitted that the legal reforms they've done until now have been fairly chaotic and haven't produced the results they've wanted.
But they're also, and he advances a kind of legal argument that because a whole bunch of court rulings have taken place under this system, that if you undid it or undid elements of it, you would also be then calling into question a lot of judgments, a lot of court rulings that have happened in the interim.
It will be a disaster, not only for Poland, but for the whole European Union, because you had, for instance, the cases economic cases between company from the Germany and between company from Poland. And so this is the real problem, and this is why the Polish government has doubts with this ruling.
Let's change topics, though, because Patrick Jaki has also been quite vocal on another topic, which is where we also see Poland taking a line which is quite different from, well, the general direction that the European Commission would like them to go in, at least in terms of the speed of travel. And that is an area you cover very closely, climate and measures to cut carbon emissions. There's this giant big package of measures being rolled out under the heading of Fit for 55. That's cutting emissions by 55% by 2030, very ambitious target. Now, the Polish government, again, is a bit of an outlier here, is not just kind of ticking all the boxes the Commission wants it to tick. What in particular are the Polish objections? And then we'll hear Patrick Jaki expand on that a bit.
The main objection is Poland's economy is very heavily coal-based. About 70% of the electricity is generated by coal. It's a very heavily industrialized country. And so the Polish contention is that the costs of a rapid decarbonization are much higher in a country like Poland than, for example, France, which uses a lot of nuclear power.
If we push Poland to energy transition with this kind of speed and significant cost, we need to ask about the point of start of every country. So from my point of view, you can't say in the same way, France and Poland, for instance, that Poland need to do the same like in France, because Poland don't have the same sources because of history like France. Because Poland was almost 50 years in the Soviet Union economy. And of course, we want to change, but not in this speed like European Commission proposal.
The counter-argument is that Poland has been earning a lot of money by selling permits under the EU's emissions trading system, but hasn't been using most of that money to decarbonize.
Right, another reason why the Polish government is kind of arguing for a go slow or warning that if they are forced to give up coal too quickly, that could have geopolitical repercussions. In particular, there's an argument around energy security, which fits in with, again, this particular Polish government, I think a more general Polish view, a wariness about relying on Russia.
This climate transition, like I said, is very important. However, we need to understand in whole Europe that the green energy is still some kind of extra value to the stable sources of energy. There are only 3 stable sources of energy. This is nuclear, coal, gas. So if we decide to decline coal, then we decide to not recommend nuclear because it's not green. So we now have only gas. And there is another question on that, from whom we can get this gas. And then on whom then we rely on. And we need to understand that the most important source of gas in whole Europe is Kremlin. And Kremlin like to play with this gas without economical reasons.
And then finally, as we do with many of our guests and with our panellists, we asked Patrick Jaki for a couple of recommendations for listeners, things that they've enjoyed reading or watching or listening to. And he had a couple of interesting ones. The first one was Cobra Kai, new to me, I have to say, but a martial arts comedy drama, which is a kind of sequel to the Karate Kid movies.
You can find in this movie lots of important messages. For instance, how important is relation between father and mother and children when they are growing up, and how childhood could impact the future of children. So this is a very good movie.
And then he also had a book recommendation, which I thought was pretty revealing about his political point of view, and also he certainly believed quite relevant to current times, and particularly the crisis with Ukraine.
I'm now reading Ronald Reagan biography by Paul Kangor. However, it's not a simple biography, it's a spiritual biography. It's very interesting, and I believe that lots of politicians can find important message nowadays. Because You know, Ronald Reagan had advisors, and these advisors tried to convince him that even with Soviet Union you can find something pragmatic. But Reagan, because of his beliefs, have a strong background from the church, and he clearly divided good and evil, and he decided to fight against evil with every measures he had. And what is important, he won. And this is important message for elite nowadays when the Russian invasion is possible, that the politicians can be like Reagan or can be like Chamberlain. And I can strongly appeal to consider this kind of history because, you know, history could be a good lesson for politicians nowadays.
Okay, that was Patrick Jaki, and thanks very much, Jan, for bringing us that conversation.
You're very welcome.
And thanks also to listener Machai for suggesting the idea for the interview. And since Patrick Jaki gave his recommendations, we're back with the podcast panel to get some more.